everyone. Let's talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of a culture hero. Two of the main characteristics, and most of this material is drawn from the reading you had on from the Encyclopedia of Religion. Most of what a culture hero does is falls into two categories: that of a creator and that of a bringer of culture, which kind of leads to the term culture hero. Often he assists another deity in creating the world. Sometimes the world is already created and he creates just certain features of that world. And we'll also look at in a moment how he makes the world safe for mankind. So creator is one of his main characteristics. The second is the obvious one. A culture hero brings culture. And what do we mean by culture? All those kinds of institutions that help us live as humans. As it says here, the arts of civilization. So we'll look at a list of what some of those things are. So not all culture heroes have all of these characteristics, but the ones we're going to look at seem to be the most common features shared amongst culture heroes. So as we mentioned a moment ago, they play a part in the world creation in that they often make it safe and make it shaped in a way for human survival. So for example, they often battle monsters, get rid of the monsters so that humans can live safely. They also alter features of the landscape to, again, helps humans live safely. For example, they'll create lakes or waterways so that humans have access to the water they need to survive. That's a fairly common feature. And sometimes the two go hand in hand. There's a Chinese myth where the young girl, actually in this case, fights a monster who is blocking access to the water. They often create distinctions, as a slide here, between men and animals. In other words, those sorts of civilized features that we consider human attributes that animals do not share. So for example, culture heroes can give speech, or they can provide fire. There are a lot of myths where fire is taken from the gods and given to humans. How do we live in society? What is polite behavior? Who are we allowed to marry, right? What are the roles of men in this society? What are the roles of women? How do we pray? To whom do we pray? How are the rituals set up? These are things that humans generally have that animals don't. So Culture Hero preserves those distinctions between humans and animals. Helps us know our roles, basically. So they make life possible so that we can sustain ourselves. So how do you make weapons? How do you hunt? How do you wage war upon your enemies? How do you grow crops and domesticate cattle for food, or animals to serve purposes like for hunting or plowing? How do we do the arts that we do? What kind of patterns do we put in our textiles and on our pottery? How do we weave? How do we shape the clay? What kind of houses do we live in, and how are those supposed to be built? If we live near water, how do we build our boats? What do our boats look like to help us navigate the waterways? There are a number of tales of how death came into the world. So there's always this original kind of Eden where there was no death, and through the culture hero, and in this slide you think of more of the trickster figure. There are similarities between trickster figures and culture heroes, and this is one of those that seems to lean more to the trickster end of the culture hero spectrum, where death comes into the world because of something that wasn't done or wasn't done properly. And again, this is more of a trickster figure sort of feature, but falls under the culture hero umbrella. So these last few are not necessarily just characteristics, but are some traits and features that culture heroes often share. So as we'll see in epic heroes, we'll be looking at Heracles. Culture heroes often have unusual origins. They're born in unusual ways, or they come from another place or time. Um, that's fairly common with a lot of heroes, but we're talking about culture heroes right now, and that's traditional. After their death, they often disappear or are changed into something else. So they might just disappear from the world altogether, or they might go back from whence they came if they weren't born in our world, or they can wind up being a constellation, or turn into a plant, or a rock, or a type of tree. Um, if they're changed into a particular monument, or a monument marks where they were killed, then that becomes a sacred location. We'll look at sacred locations later in the course, and these locations are where important rituals take place. For example, initiation rites. There are more male than female culture heroes. We're looking at a female one in our unit. Sometimes they show up in different forms, for instance, as twins, if they're humans. Usually the good twin, because they're the one creating good things, but they can be the bad or the annoying twin in terms of any kind of trickster end of the culture hero spectrum. And culture heroes can come in many forms: human, animal, or even insect.